Welcome, everybody. It looks like we've got most people joining now. So we would like to thank you for joining our webinar series. My name is Katie Lentini. I'm the Director of Channels here at FutureCom. I do want to thank everybody for joining. This presentation is titled Visibility and Monitoring the Remote Worker, presented by Keysite and FutureCom. We know you're getting approached by several companies to join in on their sessions, so we do appreciate you choosing to join ours today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone's lines have been placed on mute, but you are welcome to submit a question through the chat or Q&A window at any time, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. Everyone in attendance today at the end of the webinar will be receiving a DoorDash gift card to their registered email address. We will also be sending a follow-up email with our contact information, just in case you need that. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Justin Powell, FutureCom's Senior Sales Engineer, to speak briefly about our services capabilities. JP, go ahead.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday morning. I'm not going to take very much time this morning, but I do want to spend a few minutes just introducing FutureCom to you. If you don't know our background, I'll be done here in probably 3 or 4 minutes, but who is FutureCom? You know, one of the amazing things about this company that I've been a part of for 2 years is that it's been around for nearly 30 years, which is kind of insane in our industry. We're headquartered here in Grapevine, Texas. If you don't know, if you're not from this area, that's in the DFW area, right by DFW Airport. And we focus on what we call the 3 C's: cybersecurity, consulting, and cloud services. I call this our cheat sheet. There's other names for it, but this is the equivalent of our PowerPoint presentation when we talk to customers to show the areas where we provide products and services. Obviously, it's intended to look like a network map. So if you're technical, you're familiar with it, but all these different areas are places where we do provide either a product option or a service option. From a big picture standpoint, we like to provide what we call solutions, because what we found is that just buying technology oftentimes doesn't fix a problem. You know, you can add a quote box to the system, but if it's not configured properly, if it's not integrated with the rest of your technical infrastructure, then it may not solve the problem you're intending to solve. So we like to combine product along with implementation services or understanding what needs to be done, along with consulting services. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. We live in a world from a technical standpoint that is increasingly complex, right? The fact that we are all, or probably most of us, are joining this webinar remotely. I'm sitting in the master bedroom of my house because it's the furthest from where all of my kids are playing at the moment. But that doesn't keep me from working, right? We live in a world where we can be productive regardless of location. But from an IT perspective, that makes it much more difficult to manage and secure. We have these dispersed users, as I mentioned. You have different different devices. And I'm connected on 2 devices right now, my iPhone and my laptop, that are all accessing corporate data. You have this idea of cloud, which is really just your data on somebody else's computer somewhere else in the world, and the idea of BYOD, or shadow IT. Just to say, the complexity of the IT infrastructure is increasing as each day goes by. Now you add to that this idea, this reality, that we have a labor shortage when it comes to qualified cybersecurity engineers. These are stats from the U.S., but 62% of organizations say they're currently understaffed as related to cybersecurity headcount. It takes 3 to 6 months generally to fill a position. What we mean by that is to find a person with the right qualifications. And we're seeing an increasing number. This data says 10%, but I believe it's higher than that, of positions that are never filled because they can't find a qualified person to support a particular system or solution. And then it's predicted by 2022 that we'll have a 2 million person shortfall in qualified professionals as it relates to cybersecurity. So here's the fundamental challenge, and this is really what I want to get to. You have this increasing complexity that we discussed. There's always a time imperative in business, right? Things have to get done now, or more importantly, they have to get done yesterday. But there's always resource constraints. You know, whether it's money or whether it's labor, you have these constraints. And so what our customers are challenged with is this idea that they have to resolve more risk faster with fewer resources, right? And if we were face to face, I'd make a joke, hey, put your hand up if you want to sign up for that job. I'm right? That's not a lot of fun. That's not easy to do. And so that's where we try to help our customers bridge that gap. Like I said, whether it's with technology, but more importantly, whether it's with implementation services and consulting services, we have a wide menu, and I'm not going to read any of the next couple slides to you, but I just wanted to show them to you, whether we're talking about compliance consulting, audit service, implementation services, identity and access management. We can provide not only ongoing management, but as well as just general consulting and best practices as it relates to that. Some of the specific consulting services, whether you're talking about design and architecture, regulatory compliance, best practices. Again, this is just a list of a few of the consulting services that we offer. And then last but not least, maybe you're in a position where you need additional help. It's not just consulting. Maybe you need additional help with the management of a solution. And so that's where some of our managed services come in, whether it's a human security program, which would be sort of phishing education type program, managed email security, managed endpoint security, overall security solutions. That's something that we can work with you to manage, and quite frankly, might be something that we create based on what you need. You know, we like to work with our customers to understand what they need and provide those services. So on that note, before my dogs go insane here, I'd like to actually hand it off to Keysite. So we have Jeff Griffith today. He's the senior system engineer for Keysite, and he's going to talk to you about visibility in the remote workforce.
You should see some moving things across the screen. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Justin, for the introduction. My name is Jeff Griffith. I'm the senior systems engineer for IXIA, which is part of Keysite. You may have heard of IXIA in the visibility and test space. We're the world leader in test from layers 2 through 7. And a few years ago, we were acquired by Keysite Technologies, which many people don't know in this space because they're the world leader in layer 1 test and measurement. So we're a perfect fit for them. So they came out of the HP to Agilent spinoff and have acquired us. And so we're now one joint unit, but we're still IXIA, part of Keysite. So you'll hear both names going forward, but we're them and they're us. So make sure we keep that clear. Also with me today, I have David Sanford, who's our channels manager, and Lisa Burris, who's our regional sales manager, covering this area and working closely with FutureCom. So during the Q&A and afterwards, if we have questions and thoughts, they'll be joining me to answer those. So today, been asked to talk a little bit about user experience, which is even more important as those users are now not so much right in your own environments, but a little further away. So some of the things we'll talk about will cover still in your network, but also talk about how we can help now with those people as your network expands into, as Justin mentioned, his master bedroom with his dogs and kids. So how do we make sure they're working just as well there as they were when they were in the office? All right. So let's talk about some of the everyday challenges of handling a network and making sure that things are working the way your users expect. We'll jump into all these. I won't read them all for you, but we're going to talk about public-facing performance, provider SLAs, along with some of these other ideas here. So let's talk about mean time to resolution. Finding problems, solving problems. Those are the important things that happen. And it turns out that it's very expensive to have an outage. And it can, the longer it goes, the more it's going to cost you. But the problem isn't just necessarily resolution, it's breaking that down into its parts. So what are those parts? Well, we have the mean time to alert. How long does it take you to know you have a problem? And typically that's minutes, whether it's because a visibility system has told you have a problem, or more likely somebody has run into your office or sent you a text or a note saying, hey, we've got a problem. Fixing the problem isn't always that difficult once you know what it is. And verifying that you fixed the problem doesn't take that long. This is the problem, identifying the issue. And that can be hours to days. And when we're talking about that $100,000 per hour, the longer this takes, the more it costs. And the more upset management gets, the more upset your users are. So what if we could shorten that to minutes? that's where the real savings come in. That's where you save money. That's where you save reputation. That's where you save jobs. And that's where you keep the user experience moving along. So I talked about when you hear about a problem, typically we'd like to think that we have all the tools in place to tell us we have a problem before we have the problem. However, that's usually not the case. I come from a background of network architecture. I ran a very large retail organization, and these were the things I was given as notifications that I had a problem. My favorite was always the Wi-Fi in the conference room wasn't working well last week. Well, that's not helpful to me now. I would have liked to have known that last week. But this is usually what you're dealing with. Things like these are coming, people standing in your doorway, or now in these days sending you a Zoom or a text saying, hey, we've got a problem. And as we all know, if you're in the network world, that the network is guilty until proven innocent. There is no other answer but proving that it's not the network. So how do we fix things like this? Well, the problem is we aren't, because 70% of the time you're learning about problems from the end users. And what happens is if they don't feel that their problems are being solved or things are happening over and over again, they'll stop reporting it. So at this point, you start to see somewhere up to around 80% of problems that you don't even hear about because they're just used to it. So now you're moving along thinking everything's fine, and your users are just suffering because they're just done telling you they've got a problem. So wouldn't you like to know that you have a problem before the user tells you you have a problem? I think most of us would. Then we jump into the cloud. Now, as Justin mentioned, it's just other people's computers with your data, which makes it hard to monitor. So one of the things that we know is when people are asked, how do you know how your cloud is behaving? Hopefully you're not in the 96% that have a patchwork to all the way down to the horrible, I don't know. This is the biggest problem with the cloud today is you put your stuff there, your users are relying on it for their applications, for their mission critical business, and yet you have no real way to make sure it's performing the way you want to. And what does that bring? Well, let's talk about this. So this is one of my favorite quotes. I haven't read the other ones, hopefully you did, but this is one of my favorites, is the cost of knowledge, or knowledge is expensive, try the cost of ignorance. Not knowing is far more expensive, and we're about to prove that. So if you had a 10% increase in time for every person to complete their work, and as you've moved everybody out to the edge and they're now working through VPNs, this is even more likely. But let's apply this to the cloud, to anywhere that you could be adding this 10% overhead. So imagine that. For that 10%, with just 100 employees, that's costing you $2,000 a day and 48 minutes per employee. That doesn't seem like a lot, but when you take that over the course of a year, it could be $500,000 and 1.2 million working minutes, just having a 10% degradation, which if you've moved people over VPNs, you can imagine this is what you're experiencing. And to put that into perspective, a full-time employee works about 2,000 hours a year. So we're now paying 1.25 people to do nothing, which, sign me up for that job if you wanted to pay me full-time to sit and do nothing. But if you could go to your management and tell them, hey, I can get you 2,500 more working hours out of your people with no overtime, no headcount increase, nothing other than fixing problems before they happen, finding these slowdowns before they affect the bottom line, I think you're going to get a quick sign off from management that, yeah, they'd like to do that. So we've got all these problems. We've got to reduce the time to identify the problems. We've got to replace anecdotal measurements with actual data and facts. Wi-Fi not working last week or email is slow is not quantitative. That's just somebody telling you what they think, but you can't compare that to anything. Learning what's going on in your cloud and now your remote worker environments and finding those hidden costs. And that's where Hawkeye from IXIA comes in. We allow you to achieve deployments, move your people to the edge, and detect outages before they happen, detect slowdowns before they happen, with trending, baselining, testing throughput, all by using real applications, real communications, things like Office 365, Zoom, Skype. How do you test that? How do you know if that's working other than taking your user's word for it? We can do that. We can test into those systems and tell you what your users can expect and what you can expect. We do this with low cost hardware or software endpoints. In fact, we run on iPads. I wouldn't recommend it because iPads are a horrible tool for enterprise networks, but you can run that on an iPad if that's what you need to do. So we can run on anything. It deploys very quickly without any end user hassle. They can get if you want to send them the link, they can link, download, boom, and run, and they don't have to do anything. We're able to help with any cloud because our endpoints can live in the cloud. So now you can actually test in the cloud, and I'll run through some of the scenarios and you'll see, oh, well, that's what I need to see. With one endpoint and one simple central management. So once they're out there, you can manage them all from one single site. We expand as large as you need to. We can scale. And I put the term synthetic monitoring in here because we do synthetically monitor. However, this is actual application data that we're sending. When we say, let's send a video call from a remote user endpoint to the central endpoint, if you were to take a PCAP of that and look at the actual traffic, it looks like a real call. We're not just saying, hey, send traffic over this port and make it pretend. We're sending actual traffic. So you know what you're getting is what your users will be getting. We also have all of this with open APIs and exports in SQL, CSV, XML, JSON. So whatever format you need the export of data, we can handle that. And if you wanted to reach in and say, hey, I've got a system that's having a problem, kick off an API call to run a specific test, we can do that. So now we can integrate with your automation and orchestration tools and not just have trending, baseline, and analysis, but on-the-spot tool testing. So once you've run into an issue and you think you fixed it, how do you test that? Well, let's rerun a test. So instead of the end user having to say, hey, I think it's working, you can now validate what you just did automatically. And once we've run these tests, once we've run these over and over scheduled tests, we can drill down and show you what you've got. We run a very simple and easy to look at pass fail. So instead of having to analyze and see some number and it says, hey, this is a 76. Well, is 76 good? Is 76 bad? We think you're trending this way. It's pass fail. So if any one of the thresholds in your test fails, then the test fails, because you need to know that, because if you have 5 different thresholds and one fails, that might be the threshold that causes the problems your users are experiencing. So very easy, green, red, it's up or it's not. The reports are very simple, easily laid out to understand that every one of those thresholds. So if you can see in this case, you've got a throughput was a threshold of 14,000 and we were able to go greater than that, so we passed. And we'll give you an easy to understand what was run, what the results were, and why it failed. There's no need to do any deeper analysis than that from the report level. MOS, so if you're doing voice and video, you want to know what the user experience looks like. We do run that. We'll show you what they're experiencing so you have a baseline to compare against. So if somebody says it's slow, you can take a look and see. All right, so let's dig in a little further into how we deploy this. So with those endpoints being cloud-based, being application-based, or being hardware-based, we can be everywhere. We can be in data centers, we can be at your user end, we can be everywhere. We have some hardware endpoints. We have a Raspberry Pi with a custom wireless dongle. We'll go into a little bit more about what that gets you later, but Wi-Fi testing becomes very important, especially as your home users are now relying on their home Wi-Fi to test and report on what they're showing. This is our newest release. This XR probe is actually a piece of hardware that lives on the outside. So for years, the hard part has been you can test all the way up to your router. you can know that your inside is working, and then you can test across from the outside, but where does that problem lie? So what we do is we have a probe now that lives actually on the carrier side of your router and can run those same tests. So you now take your inside environment out of the mix, and you're now testing solely from the carrier side. So if you do have a problem, you can go back to them with actionable items. All right, the Wi-Fi monitoring. So this is great for, especially now in this new world of users working from home on their home Wi-Fi, is with these endpoints or software, you can now get into looking at how many other APs they're hearing. And if they've got a ton of neighbors who are all now also working from home, you're probably hearing all kinds of interference, all kinds of noise, all kinds of things. And now you'll know what channels work best, what sort of signal strength. So you know if you need to help with their home Wi-Fi to solve their problem rather than try to fix the VPN or your inside network. And by running these tests, so we can run voice and video tests and then run it from a Wi-Fi endpoint and then compare, well, here's, say, in this case, it was a download test, and here's the Wi-Fi at the same time. So we can corroborate, is it Wi-Fi that's causing issues? Is the signal strength an issue? Is the speed of connection to my Wi-Fi an issue? Or is there something else? So now we can line up side by side actual tests and measurements and see if one is related to the other. And in the enterprise environment, you may have Wi-Fi information from your Wi-Fi AP provider, but they're telling you what the APs see. They're telling you what's going on up in the ceiling. They're not telling you what the clients are experiencing down at the client level. And that's some of the stuff that we can help with. So when we talked about this, we talked about looking at your customer experience, your user experience, and we can do the continuous check, round trip time, loss, things like that. We do web page downloads, so time to first packet, time to download the whole page. We can even do logins, we can do secure logins, we can do authentication. How long did it take to run all of that process? How long, we do the quick speed tests, just a down and dirty, how fast did it take, did my packet get from A to B? Or we can run the whole link speed. If you're trying to test a 1 meg, a 100 meg, a 1 gig link, we can run it full line rate and see if you're getting that for validation. And then we talked about those cloud-based services. Am I getting problems on my side or the problems in Zoom? Is it a Skype issue? Is O365 having slowdowns? Maybe you can contact them and say, hey, can you move me out of this region and into this other region while you fix these problems? We also do what we call network path discovery. And what this allows you to do is test the path from one site to another. And as your end users are now doing more of their work from home, what are the paths they're taking to get to you? It's not so simple as it used to be where you had a dedicated line or a DSL line from remote site to home site, and those, you always knew which way they were going. Now there's a lot of multipath. So one of the things we do is we run these tests from your endpoint all the way into wherever you want. And we check every step along the way, and we show you the loss, the round trip time to get to that spot. And when we hit a multipath, maybe this is somebody's BGP AS, or maybe it's some sort of MPLS. It's some sort of, we'll show you all the steps we took because we run this test multiple times at once. The default's 10, but you can run as many as you want, and we'll show you every step we took and the loss in each one of those. Maybe you'll see that one of these has huge amounts of loss, and you can contact the provider and say, hey, stop taking my traffic down this link because here's a report showing that you have loss on that hop. And now not only is your mean time to identify shortened, but you've now handed the mean time to identify shortening to your carrier so they can fix your problem faster and get you back at your SLA. And then we talked about campus, office branches, your LAN performance, your WAN performance. We want to check those things. You need to look at your applications. So is it the applications problem or is it the network problem? And because we run actual application traffic, we're able to discern, hey, the network KPIs are great when we run this test, but when we run it with this application, there's something wrong. So you can start to dig into, is it the web server? Is it the back end between the web server and the database? Things like that. And we can check that user VPN access. one of those things as people have moved away is, hey, my VPN was meant for 5 or 6 people on vacation, maybe 10 people working remotely every now and then. And now you've gone to 100, 1,000. Can your VPN handle that? Or what's that sweet spot for your VPN where it starts to throw issues and you can right size the VPN environment for this new world? We talked about the path discovery and cloud access. So how much do you need? What's the capacity? How fast will your application run when you move it to the cloud before you move it to the cloud? So we can show you application from A to B, and that B can be in the cloud before you've even moved the application there. And there's just a pretty picture with moving things because that looks nice. So we test from end user to cloud. We call this a mesh. We can test from the end user to the DC. We can test VM to VM within your private cloud, cloud to cloud, cloud to public cloud, and then within the public cloud, or cloud provider to cloud provider. Perhaps you have a hybrid of AWS and Azure. We can run tests from one to the other and make sure that that's not causing the problem. So we're now giving you the ability to see behaviors and performance anywhere in your environment, instead of relying on the application to tell you it had a problem, the network to tell you it had a problem, or even worse, your users to tell you you had a problem. So we know all of those. That's all the stuff we're doing. We've talked about that. Circuit turn up. So before you open a new site, before you bring it online, run the tests with the actual applications and speeds. Make sure that you're getting the SLA you were promised. Make sure the class of service is being handled from end to end and not being dropped. And with that, I believe we're going to move to Q&A. So thanks for spending that last 20 minutes with me. And if there are any questions, I believe we're going to turn it back over to Justin and Katie to moderate those, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to Justin and Jeff for that information. That concludes the presentation portion, and we are going to move into our Q&A session. So we do have some questions already coming in on the panel, but if you do think of any more, please feel free to keep adding those as we continue through this. And I'm going to just start addressing those, guys. The first one I have looks like it says, if I am planning to roll out a new collaboration or multimedia application on my network, can or how does Hawkeye help me so that I can anticipate challenges, test the application performance, monitor ongoing application performance, so on and so forth?
Sure, that's a great question. Absolutely. So we can run the voice, the video, the standard applications. We do run quite a few of the remote applications. If you have a new one or a custom one that we don't do specifically, we can build a payload. We can use the right ports. We can use all of the things and communicate with that server and give you an idea of what that will behave like before you roll it out. And we can also then say, well, this is one user. What happens when 10 users do this? And so that's one of the other key points is running one test is great, but what happens when 10 users now jump on? What happens when 100 users try to log in and access this front page? We can do that too. So, that'd be a great follow-up. We could certainly sit down and talk about the specifics of the application and see what we could bring. But also, you would then have that baseline before the users jumped on. So you'd know how it was behaving, and as more and more users go, you'll have that trend and see if it's moving up and things need to be adjusted, bandwidth needs to be added, capacity, things like that.
Awesome, thank you. Hope that answered that question. Here's another one. If I had a customer-facing application hosted in the cloud, how can Hawkeye help me identify areas for performance improvement or notify me of potential performance problems on the horizon?
Sure, that's a great question. So because we can be in the cloud, we can actually put our endpoints there as cloud-based endpoints or log into, again, the website or the front end or run actual application type traffic from your user point to your cloud. We can see what that behavior should be like. And again, step it up to multiple users and see how that's reacting. We can also try it from other clouds. So it doesn't just have to be from one site, and that's where a lot of the test and monitoring has the problem, is it's usually run from one site. But by being everywhere and saying, hey, run this test all the time from an end user site, from corporate, from a cloud-based site, or multiple cloud-based sites, you can see what that response will be from, whether it's US East people who are connecting to the cloud there, US West, all over the world. You can host these, run them from cloud to cloud or from various other sites. Once you have that baseline, you'll know exactly how that is behaving, and that trend analysis. So you have in your reports will be a trend analysis, and you'll say, hey, it looks like I'm still within threshold, but I'm starting to get closer and closer and closer on many of these tests to maxing out somewhere and crossing a threshold where I think that the performance will be degraded, sorry, and I need to do something about it. So you will have information, and you can set those trends to warn you when you hit a certain, hey, I'm now hitting 70% of threshold. I'd like to know about that. And that will give you the time to get in and say, okay, this is changing. Is it something we can do with what we have, or do we need to modify whether it's capacity of servers, capacity of systems, or throughput, or whatever it is?
Thanks, Jeff. All right,
Sure.
we've got several more here.
Okay.
Let's see. Does the Hawkeye Management Station require a specialized appliance?
Great question. It's a VM, can be on can be on VMware, can be on KVM, OpenStack, can run on any of those, and it is a simple application. And the beauty of it is that the tests are run from endpoint to endpoint, not from endpoint to management station. The management station is simply a collector of information and a way for you to tell those endpoints what to do. So all they need is a few ports open so that they can communicate on that level, but your tests aren't being hindered by having to go through that middleman. So it's just a simple virtual machine that's running the management software.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, let's see if I can address another one here. So what does a deployment on an enterprise scale look like for an IT team? So what kind of interactions or software distributions with end users are dependent for this scale?
So I guess if the question is how easy is this to roll out to large scale,
Yeah.
that really depends on whether you're going hardware endpoints, mix and match, downloads. If you had 1,000 users and you wanted to monitor all their systems, you could put the executable loaded into their, if you're doing management like some sort of SCCM or endpoint management, you roll that in, force that out as a software update, and now it's on their systems and you can access them and have them run tests without them being involved. So your users don't have to kick off tests, even if you're monitoring from their end station, which is a nice change, because in a lot of cases you say, okay, kick off this test. You have total access to that. So in terms of hit to the IT team, once you've set it up and decided the tests that you want to run, one of the things that we've added in the latest release is instead of you having to determine those thresholds, we have the ability for you to check a box and say, hey, let's learn the thresholds. So you run the tests over time and we'll start to dial in, hey, this seems to be your comfort zone. Are you comfortable with this? Or if you want to fix it before we go forward. So we allow you to find thresholds per test that work for you instead of just saying, hey, here's some, let's do some trial and error, and you get a bunch of alerts. So we've made that part easier on the IT team for rollout. The other part of that is we've also got what we call outliers. So you can say, hey, 5% of tests failing in an hour is okay. That's an acceptable, or 2%, or whatever your number is, and it can be different for every type of test, because you may have one test that goes, for whatever reason, we all have seen it, where there's a burst, there's something going on, and you break a time threshold or a download speed threshold, and that fixes itself because it was something that just happened. Instead of getting alerted, you can say, hey, I need there to be a certain number of these before this is a problem, which also alleviates a lot of that pressure on the IT team from responding to ones and twos of issues when it may not be an issue. So those are some of the things we've done to make it a little easier on IT teams for rollout. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Okay. I think we're sparking some more questions here. So how many FTEs would be needed to set up and then manage and monitor the solution for over 5,000 users on an ongoing basis?
That's a great question. The initial rollout, if it's all software, like I said, and you're managing those endpoints, one guy could set that up to be rolled out next time they get their software updates. From there, it becomes a matter of hardware endpoints. Each one, of course, takes time to come online, get configured, set up, and then plugged in where they go. Setting up each one of those tests, depending on how many tests you're trying to run. If you're just doing some basic, hey, I want to see some network KPIs, I want to see some of this, that's pretty easy. If you're getting more detailed with DNS lookups and you want to get into DHCP hits, things wireless, where you want to do some authentication tests, how long does it take me to connect, authenticate, and become part of the Wi-Fi, especially if you have a captive portal, that may take some time and you may need a few guys to get that set up. Once it's up and running, typically what you do is you say, hey, I'm getting, these tests are for my, let's just say, network performance team. These tests are for my application performance team. These tests have to do with Wi-Fi. And you can have each one of those alerts and notifications sent to an email group specific to that test, so that you're only notifying the people that are necessary and the teams that already exist. So ongoing care and feeding of the system is really a matter of how often you're changing tests. Once you've got things up and running and you've got automated reports, automated schedules of these tests, it could really be one person's job to just kind of make sure the system is updated and maintained and respond to requests for new tests. So it can be the curve is heavy up front to get it rolling for something like that, but it becomes over time a much easier product to manage than the initial setup would be.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to go to this next one. What are the differences of running tests from an endpoint or VM compared to using a physical appliance? Are there specific situations when I would need to use hardware device for the testing instead?
Great question. Yes, there are differences. VMs will give you the specs that say, hey, this VM should have these things available to run these tests. However, we all know that if that VM's running anything else, we're always going to be vying for the resources. So over time, you'll get a standard say, hey, this is what seems to come out of this system. But would you rely on that for immediate resolution? I don't know. We'd have to talk about the specific environment in the VM and what else it's doing. So yeah, there are things, and same with user endpoints. If that user is doing some heavy SQL run, their system may have some slowness on the stacks before it gets to the command to run the test. So those are things to take into account. So that's why some of the Wi-Fi tests where we're doing some listening and doing some heavy lifting, some of these endpoints where we're trying to see how we get into Skype or O365, or how long it takes to do a Dropbox download, things like that, where we want to be very specific, or I want to get from point A to point B and I want to know the actual latency, then a dedicated small hardware appliance that's only doing this and will only run one test at a time to prevent there from being any test anomalies because it's running multiple tests. If you want true actual data from a device that's only doing that, that's where we would make sure you were running hardware. But we could sit down and talk about what's the best case for each one of these to be running and how reliable the data is depending on what it's doing.
Yeah, that was a great question. Okay, how is licensing handled in terms of, is it per test, per application, per device running the test?
Sure. So we license per endpoint and per consecutive, or concurrent, not consecutive, concurrent tests. If you were, even if you had 1,000 endpoints, but you were only running one test per hour per endpoint, you could license for one concurrent test, or one 30-second test takes, you could run 120 of those in an hour and be licensed for that many tests. So it's concurrent tests and number of endpoints.
Okay, another great question. How is management station high availability deployed, and is there real-time synchronization for that?
So that is where we would depend on like a vMotion or having a backup. That's why it's on a virtual system, because the endpoints can only speak to one management station. There has been discussion that we could put a backup management station for them to talk to. But however, typically because these are remotely spread and may not always have access to the central station because of whatever reason, they may start firing off and trying to talk to the backup. There are a lot of intricacies that come with that. So as of right now, there is no HA. And that's where we would talk about, hey, maybe we vMotion somewhere or something like that. But we could talk about ways we've handled that scenario for specific environments.
Okay, and this one might have been answered, I don't recall, but what OS platform does this run on? Is it Windows, Linux?
So the OS itself is Linux. Under the hood, this is all run on a Linux core that we have modified for doing what we want. But now that said, the endpoints can be Windows, can be Android, iPhone, Mac, whatever. We have an endpoint for every one of those, but the management system itself is Linux.
Okay. And then this one's kind of a multi-part question. If I'm planning to replace or re-architect my wireless infrastructure because of performance complaints, then how does Hawkeye help me determine the components that are contributed to those complaints, the poor user performance, and can they ensure that the new solution will fix the performance issues?
Okay, so sure. So what we can do is, because any test that's run from a wireless endpoint, so let's say you've got users out on the edge and they're running just the network key performance indicators. Every time they run a test and they're connected via Wi-Fi, they're also giving you the exact Wi-Fi stats, the signal strength at time of test, the AP they were connected to, the RSSI, all of the things that go back into the wireless. They'll give you a quick glance into what was going on at time of test. So you'll know, was it the Wi-Fi or was there something else going on? And that's why I got a different test. In terms of the Wi-Fi specific, where we show the noise in the environment, the number of APs, the channels, we can say, hey, look, maybe you've got too many APs being heard because I've got a guy here that's showing he is connecting or hearing 7 different APs on the same channel. So maybe we need to do some sort of mitigation where we're backing down the signal strength because we're just overblowing the system everywhere. So we can look into what's causing the issue through that. We do the captive portal logins. I did a test not that long ago for a large residential facility at a university where they were going to bring in 5,000 students. And we pretended we were 5,000 endpoints all hitting the captive portal at the same time to see if we could tip it over or if it would withstand that. So we can show where the issues are. If you determine that, hey, the Wi-Fi system we have just isn't up to standard and is causing all these problems, what we can do is, we can do that before the users get on the new rollout and say, hey, here's what we're seeing all over the place. By having endpoints that are living like in conference rooms or areas that have of a lot of concentration, we can run tests even when the users aren't connected to Wi-Fi and give results, so you'll know what's happening before the users do, and that will help you trend and analyze and see where those issues are. So there's a lot we can bring to the Wi-Fi. And not to step out of the Hawkeye product, but we actually have a different product called VeriWave that does AP testing and stressing, golden AP testing, helps you figure out which manufacturer will provide what you want. We can simulate thousands of users all on one AP at the same time. We can simulate across a load of APs, help you get the best AP config that you could then push out. So we can go much deeper down the Wi-Fi testing if you're actually having full-scale Wi-Fi issues and wanting to know how to best build out the new Wi-Fi environment.
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you. And it looks like I've got one more, unless any others come in. Are the alerts specific to a single test only, or is there an ability to correlate multiple tests over time to see more long-term patterns?
Oh, great question. Absolutely. So Alerts are test by test basis. So now, but you can template these tests so that they all run the same. But what you can also do is in your reports, you can group by metric. So you can take a look at your network KPIs, your, you name it, all of the different, any different metric we test, any different threshold can be grouped regardless of test there where it was run. So yes, you'll get a trend that says, hey, I didn't just get an alert from this test or this test. I'm starting to see a trend across the board of all of my, say it's latencies. My latencies are steadily climbing across my test bed. So yes, we do group them by metric as well.
Great, that was an awesome question. It looks like we have answered all the questions. There were some really good ones in there. If you do think of any additional questions after this session, then please feel free to reach out. We've got the contact information up on the screen right now. You'll also receive this in the follow-up email that you receive after the webinar. So it looks like we've answered all the questions. Don't forget that we do have another webinar scheduled for Friday, June 12th, and that's actually with our friends at ExtraHop, and their presentation's titled Rise Above the Noise. As many of you know, ExtraHop and IXIA have had a strong relationship and have a great joint solution that secures hybrid networks. So definitely, if you have the opportunity here in 2 weeks, then join that session. To sign up, you can visit our website, check out our LinkedIn, or you can reach out to your account manager and they can get you the information on that. And if there's no further questions, and this concludes today's webinar, you will receive your gift card within an hour from DoorDash. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you, and thank our speakers, Justin and Jeff, today. And everybody have a great, safe weekend.